Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I invite you to watch and listen to the Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Martika Ibarra and the great, legendary Hollywood costume designer, Marilyn Vance. I am afforded the wonderful opportunity of co-hosting the show. If you are interested in the magic of Hollywood, the design of Hollywood, the clothes of Hollywood, watch the Designing Hollywood podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts from, or find the video version on YouTube. That's right, the Designing Hollywood podcast. Why would you ever want to miss it, especially if you love the movies?
Tango Shalom is now available on all VOD
major platforms. I think we messed that up.
Video on demand, or as they say in the trade, VOD.
VOD. Tango Shalom is now available on all VOD platforms,
which means
video on demand.
Look how you know. You must be a high school graduate.
I'm a college graduate.
Really?
Yes.
I got an honorary degree from Hofstra. Did you get an honorary degree?
No, I got a degree.
Oh, well, I got honorary. You know, I'm in the Jewish Museum.
What for?
What do you mean? As a famous Jew in the Bronx. I'm in the famous...
I'm in the Prospect Park in the Stones.
How big is the stone?
Robservations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your evangelist of the imagination, of course, your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am once again robcasting at you. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations episode number 768, for those of you who are keeping score. Now, this is the obligatory yearly Star Trek the Motion Picture anniversary show, where we're going to talk some Star Trek. We're going to talk about my favorite Star Trek movie, which is Star Trek the Motion Picture. Controversial choice, to be sure. As my friend, the producer Adrian Iscaria of the Hitman movies fame would tell you, I don't know what I'm talking about. He loves to tease me about Star Trek the Motion Picture and my love for it. And that love is eternal. Now, here's the thing. Do I think it's a perfect movie? No. We all know, or a lot of us know, about the troubled production of the film. It was backed into a release date. And unlike, well, very similar to the Enterprise in the movie itself, it was launched before its time. It wasn't ready to go out, and they were rushing to finish it. Bob Abel and Associates, the original effects company on the film, was let go, giving John Dykstra and Doug Trumbull and their teams at the effects teams less than a year to do all the effects. And obviously the film is a huge, immense effects challenge. So they were rushing to the finish line, and they were changing the script pages around. It was not exactly the best way to make a film. And despite that, there are things about Star Trek the Motion Picture that were pretty unprecedented. And if you think about it, Star Trek was essentially a failed television show. Not in the sense that, I mean, it was obviously it was one of the great television shows of all time, but it was always struggling for survival. It was never top of the ratings when it was on between 66 and 69. Obviously, a letter-writing campaign saved the show in its third season, but Roddenberry was replaced by Fred Freiberger as the executive producer. The show was given a Friday night at 10 o'clock death spot, where its very audience was not at home to watch television anyway. So the idea that in the wake of Star Wars, everybody was scrambling around to try and duplicate the success of George Lucas's now legendary franchise. And, of course, they had tried to make a Star Trek movie before, Philip Kaufman, who later went on to do the 1978 Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and he came up with a story for Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he directed The Right Stuff, and Henry and June, and The Unbearable Lightness of Being. He was going to direct a film called Star Trek Planet of the Titans. And Ken Adam and Ralph McQuarrie had famously done designs. Ken Adam was the production designer, and that got scuttled. Then they were going to do a Star Trek Phase 2 television series. They were actually in the middle. They had built sets, and they were doing camera tests. And in the wake of the success of Star Wars, they scuttled that, even though 13 episodes were written or in the process of being written. A couple of those actually found their way onto Next Generation. The first episode of the second season, The Child, and a fourth season episode called Devil's Due were written originally for the Star Trek Phase 2 series. They were recycled for Next Generation. But when Star Trek The Motion Picture was made, if you think about it, at the time it was one of the most expensive films ever. And you brought back these television actors and put them in the most expensive movie ever. It's crazy that Star Trek The Motion Picture really got made. Now, one of the things that I appreciate about Star Trek The Motion Picture is it is a movie about adults doing adult things, acting like adults in a difficult situation. And one of the things that I thought was really audacious about Star Trek The Motion Picture is our three principal characters, Kirk, Spock, McCoy, are not in a happy place when the movie starts. We watch Spock utterly fail to achieve Kolinar. And Kolinar was a discipline he was undergoing with Vulcan Masters to purge, as Dr. McCoy says, all remaining human emotion. And he fails. And because he hears a consciousness calling to him from space, a power and a logic he's never encountered before. But he fails at doing a task. And we see Kirk. Kirk is not happy. He's been head of Starfleet operations sitting behind a desk instead of hopping galaxies for 2.5 years. Dr. McCoy is basically drafted back into the service. He'd been studying Fabrini medicine, which you find out in the novelization. The Fabrini were, of course, introduced in the Star Trek episode For the World is Hollow and I Have Touched the Sky. They all existed on an asteroid called Yonada. So McCoy was there, presumably studying with Natira or whomever, and having a good time. He got called back, so he's not happy about it either. Mr. Scott has to drag the Enterprise out, a brand new refitted Enterprise, which is well, folks, we'll see if this continues. I was in the middle of talking and my screen just all winked out. I don't know what happened there. Hopefully we'll stay going. Very odd, very strange. I guess I'm back. But anyway, there is a huge galactic threat, not unlike what we're seeing on every season of Star Trek Discovery now. But Star Trek The Motion Picture is a somber film, and it is not. What's really interesting about people forget that the original series, it's almost like Star Trek was an anthology show. It had the same characters, but every episode was different. Sometimes you got a dramatic episode. Sometimes you got an emotional episode. Sometimes you got a good character study. Other times you got an apocalyptic episode or a war episode. And there's a lot of Star Trek episodes that people forget are somber affairs, like the Doomsday Machine or the Immunity Syndrome or Balance of Terror. And I've always I always liked the more serious episodes of Star Trek. And I saw the reason I love Star Trek The Motion Picture so much, well, one, it's the world building. We get to see the 23rd century the way we'd never seen it before. And it's really pretty impressive. I mean, everything that they do, the Enterprise has never looked better. But what I liked seeing our characters in situations you'd never seen them in before. And I really liked watching our main characters come together again and find each other, find where they belong together. They're the family unit that none of them really have. And it was great over the course of the movie to watch them come together. Now, a lot of people talk about the film being the slow motion picture, that it moves like molasses. Well, a lot of that was because they didn't have enough time to edit the film, obviously. And I think the director's edition that was originally done back in 2000, they're now redoing it in 4K. The team that originally worked with Robert Wise is reconstituting the Star Trek Director's Edition, which was only ever finished in standard def. So I'm excited to get that. I think the film works better with that extra added bit of editorial polish. And I think the thing about Star Trek the Motion Picture is it's very similar to the original series if you look at the character interactions. I mean, these are adults. These adults are dealing with potentially catastrophic, world-ending problems, and at the same time, they in very adult fashion deal with their emotions, deal with their Kirk's obsessed with getting the Enterprise back. You've got Decker and Ilea reconnecting in a romantic relationship, trying to figure out what's going on. And then you have this incredible threat, the threat of V'ger, and it's a mysterious threat. It's a cosmic threat. It feels like there's something really interesting and yet really dangerous and deadly happening. And for somebody like myself, I enjoy movies like Solaris and 2001. And I like things that are deliberately paced. And the funny thing is some of my favorite episodes of Star Trek are those somber episodes. Whether it's something like Operation Annihilate, whether it is the Immunity Syndrome or the Doomsday Machine, or it is Balance of Terror. Star Trek the Motion Picture is not too far removed from those episodes. And yet people forget all about that because somehow people looking back into the past with rose-colored glasses forget that Star Trek wasn't always a piece of the action or the Trouble with Tribbles or Errand of Mercy or Amok Time or Arena with the Gorn. There was all different kinds of Star Trek episodes, and Star Trek the Motion Picture is one of those contemplative, apocalyptic, important feeling episodes. Now, there's a couple of articles that I did want to read about Star Trek the Motion Picture, both pro and con. I think I've read this article before, to be honest, but I think it's worth a revisit, because why not? This was in Entertainment Weekly 5 years ago. This was published, it's by Darren Franich. It was published on April 29th, 2016. It is the 55th anniversary of Star Trek this year. It debuted September 8th, 1966 on American television. But this was celebrating the 50th anniversary. Star Trek turns 50 this year. It's now 55. It is the most important of the great pop culture franchises. Maybe. The first realized vision of a cross-platform fictionalized universe. There are long-running narrative ideas that predate Trek's 1966 TV debut. Sure, James Bond, Middle-earth, Godzilla, Spider-Man, Superman, Sherlock Holmes. But the Star Trek half-century is the half-century of fandom, canon, mythology, spin-offs, young faces growing old across sequels and reboots. It is the age that fandom took over the movie industry, or the age of the movie industry co-opting fandom. Consider, the other franchises had come to Hollywood. Trek started here, to the south in Culver City at Desilu Productions, rescued from development oblivion because Lucille Ball had serious sway. If you want to understand everything fascinating about our movie moment, the push and pull between fans and creators, between beloved actors and the characters who define them, between the exclusives with all the money and the creators with all the ideas, between the executives, not exclusives, between the demand for more of what has already worked and the constant need to set off in bold new directions, between the finite creative possibilities of special effects, actually it's the infinite now, and the infinite destructive possibilities of special effects, you need to understand Star Trek. It is the miracle of modern entertainment. Star Trek turns 50 this year. It is the most inessential of the great pop culture franchises, maybe, forever chasing the stylistic advances of younger upstart entertainments. Forever trapped in the narrative tropes of hackneyed philosophy, a vision of the future long past. Once progressive in vision, the franchise turned conservative in its desperate curation. In Trek, you see the beginning of the Faustian bargain between fan and executive, between the person who wants more of the same and the person unwilling to try anything new that would transform genre storytelling from the fascinating fringe into the vanilla mainstream. In Trek, you see the end of science fiction as a venue for ideas, the never-ending birth of remake culture. You can pinpoint the moment when every movie needed to be an action movie. If you want to understand everything depressing about our movie moment, how every movie is an advertisement for another movie, how the most expensive films in history have less emotional impact than a middling episode of Better Call Saul, how directors became crossing guards, how actors became spokespeople, and why a Pulitzer Prize-winning author is working on the Hasbro Cinematic Universe, you have to understand Star Trek. It is the downward spiral, the totalitarian mirror universe. It is modern entertainment's original sin. There is no simple way to understand Star Trek. There are high highs and low lows. There is canon and fanon, a general sense that continuity doesn't matter, running alongside a fierce protection of the holy canon. There are arguments, Kirk versus Picard, Deep Space Nine versus everything. Voyager was secretly brilliant the whole time. JJ saved Star Trek. JJ ruined Star Trek. Best to focus in, I think. On July 22nd, the 13th and last Star Trek movie will arrive in theaters. If Star Trek Beyond is awful, it still might not be the worst Star Trek movie. If Beyond is fantastic, it still might not be the best Star Trek movie. Trek cinema is all over the map. Thrilling, boring, experimental, primitive, expensive, shoestring. Maybe Star Trek should only be a TV show. A new one arrives in 2017. Maybe Star Trek should only be about Enterprise. Maybe it should just end. Maybe we're just beginning. Every week from now until Beyond, we'll look closely at one of the movies, in chronological order from Kirk to Picard and to Kirk again. And hopefully we'll understand. There are some moments in Star Trek the Motion Picture that are so beautiful, serene, cosmic, passionately alive with the possibility of the infinite. You want to cry, you don't know why. There are planetscapes and solaric abstractions and effervescent fugue core incoherence rippling across electric oceans. The villain in the motion picture is one such abstraction, a demigod vapor planet of unknown origin and unknowable purpose. It is the first thing we see in the movie, and we never really see it at all. In the first scene of the motion picture, 3 Klingon ships approach a cloud. In 1979, a Star Trek fan would have recognized the design of the Klingon ships, but things would also have looked different to that diehard Trek fan. The camera follows the ships as they move across the stars, the kind of special effect that was practically impossible when Star Trek was on TV. The Klingons are different too, more alien, with makeup and forehead prosthetics. The subtext could be understood by a child. Star Trek is now Star Trek. And things sound better too. The motion picture opens with the new Star Trek theme by Jerry Goldsmith, one of the greatest and most instantly recognizable music cues in the last 4 decades. And the first scene is set to Goldsmith's Klingon battle theme. That track might actually be better than Goldsmith's theme tune, the way John Williams' The Imperial March is deeper, richer, funnier, and more dramatic than the Star Wars main theme. The motion picture needs you to know that it's a movie, by God. It's right there in the title, the motion picture. A phrase connoting something bigger, better, more official, maybe even more pure than all that had come before. You can feel an implication. Wouldn't Star Trek be even better on the big screen? Today, the motion picture is a meaningless title. It runs along another outdated idea that movies are fundamentally better than television. Almost 4 decades on, TV is more like movies, and movies are more like TV. And roll with me, please. Motion pictures stopped being a thing you watch and started being your life and how you express yourself. Your 10-year-old nephew makes motion pictures. Your 10-year-old nephew films from better angles than Robert Wise. Wise directed the motion picture. He is one of perhaps 20 people who you could say saved Star Trek. And he is one of perhaps 30 who you could say almost destroyed Star Trek. The lists overlap. Gene Roddenberry's on both, at the top. But if you allow for some wide wiggle room in your definition of authorship, all the best motion pictures in the motion picture come from Douglas Trumbull. Trumbull was a special effects guy, worked on some of the most famous sequences in 2001: A Space Odyssey, was just finishing Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and would soon craft the neon grit world of Blade Runner. An impressive one, and one that maybe Trumbull himself only appreciates as a complimentary prize from fate. In the early 70s, Trumbull directed Silent Running, a big idea space thinker that earned the kind of negative money cult sensations always earn. Trumbull only agreed to do the motion picture out of spite. Paramount was in a jam. He was on contract to them. They needed him. He wanted nothing to do with Paramount ever again, so he agreed to finish the movie's special effects on a tight turnaround on the condition that he would never have to work with Paramount again. He worked his team hard, in his own telling. Trumbull wound up in the hospital for 2 weeks, exhausted. Working alongside one-time protege John Dykstra, who created some of the most memorable effects in Star Wars and much of the Close Encounters team, Trumbull, the weirdest and gorgeous and often wildly incongruous visions ever seen in a science fiction movie. Much of it looks unreal, like this early shot of the planet Vulcan, rendered across matte paintings and smoke effects and the tease of rock-formed gargantuans. Who knows how this played in '79, so soon after Star Wars imagined alien planets as real on-location setups in Tunisia and Guatemala? In the best and maybe most despised sequence from the motion picture, the Starship Enterprise enters the God Cloud, and for 10 minutes we see an interior that seems to hold the cosmos. It's the closest thing to a tesseract ever caught on film. The deeper we go, the more there is. There's a shot in this sequence that may be the single most stunning image ever captured in a Star Trek project. Maybe that doesn't matter as much as we think. Maybe the franchise only gets worse when the people involved think stunning images are what defines Star Trek. But toward the end of this journey inwards, the camera pulls back to what a cinematographer might call a cosmically extreme long shot, and we see the great Starship Enterprise, a speck on this monster's horizon. Later, Spock puts on a spacesuit and goes on his own private journey through what you can safely describe as a cosmic vaginal endoscape. The cutting strategy is familiar to anyone who saw 2001. Spock's face, something crazy. Spock's face, something crazy. At the end of Spock's journey, there is a woman, Ilea. But it doesn't matter. Names don't matter in the motion picture. Nothing any person does really matters. We know that's not the real woman. She's back on the Enterprise, or some version of her is. But Spock is tantalized, to the extent that any character has a journey. In the motion picture, Spock has been seeking something the whole movie. A higher state of consciousness, maybe. He seems to find it here, in this glowing representation of a woman. An unearthly glow encompasses him, erasing his face from our sight. He reaches out his hands to mind meld, to know. The mind meld blasts Spock backwards. The effect is, no other way of saying this, orgasmic. Spock describes the strange thoughts he experienced inside the creature's brain. Is this all that I am, he says? Is there nothing more? The motion picture's monster is in the midst of an existential crisis. It turns out it was a computer created by man, Voyager 6, or Voyager, a satellite sent out to the stars. In the stars, it found more computers, which gave it inconceivable power. It has seen everything now, and in achieving total cosmic awareness, it has also achieved sentience. It lives. So what? In the motion picture, the what now is, well, sex, or togetherness, or the awareness of other life, or the knowledge that we live only so that we can create other things that live. It's all a bit abstract, but don't Zen Buddhists seem pretty happy? The movie ends with Ilea and Decker, another nothing character. They might as well be named Adam and Eve, woman and man, thing one and thing two, bonding with the cloud thing. The climactic image of them receiving enlightenment, ascending to a higher state, dying, being reborn, is one of the silliest and most transcendent special effects shots ever. I think we gave it the ability to create its own sense of purpose, conclude Spock and Kirk. You might point out rightly that creating a sense of purpose is not the most dramatic concept for a movie. You might also point out, just as rightly, that creating a sense of purpose is the central experience of humanity. How do you put such a vague but universal experience on screen? How do you conjure up the fear that there is no purpose? Maybe you need a new language, something beyond words, cinema, or whatever cinema used to be. Decades later, Wise worked on a special cut of the motion picture. It was released with added digital effects, not the first time a major moment in Trek history happened because of Star Wars, not the last time a terrible moment in Trek history happened because of Star Wars. That special cut adds in a few shots that seem to clearly identify what Voyager looks like. This is helpful only if you think that incoherence was the motion picture's problem and not its saving grace. The first Star Trek film has almost no real story, and the characters are only characters because we know their names and faces from a long-dead TV show. But you could spend a long time pondering the image of the Enterprise dwarfed and surrounded by V'ger. You wonder what it must have been like to see that on the big screen. You wonder what it must have felt like to only see motion pictures on the big screen. You wonder, above all, what it was like to feel so small in the universe. The motion picture depends on you loving space. And I mean space both ways, as in everything outside of Earth, and as in height and depth and width and distance. In 2016, nobody pays much attention to outer space except as one more piece of nostalgia bait trending curiosity. Is Pluto still not a planet? And maybe we don't pay as much attention to the other definition of space. What does distance mean to digital natives? So the motion picture is beloved by film theorists and special effects nerds and people who treat marijuana as a sacrament. But in 2016, special effects are too common and marijuana too legal to feel sacred. Kirk looks at the Enterprise for the first time around minute 16 of the motion picture and doesn't stop until minute 23. Kirk and Scotty are riding a little shuttle to their ship, and that ride takes 7 minutes of screen time. It is slow, and nothing happens, unless you love Douglas Trumbull's special effects and Jerry Goldsmith's music, unless you can groove into the idea that looking is an active state. Wrath of Khan is to the motion picture as the motion picture is to Solaris. Kirk's returning to the old ship after years behind a desk. He ascended from the captain's chair to become Chief of Starfleet Operations. One of the many accidental gags in the motion picture's nonsense script is that Kirk must have been truly terrible at operating Starfleet. There's a giant killer glass cloud coming towards Earth, and the only starship in interception range is the Enterprise. The only starship isn't Earth, like the center of Starfleet operations. Wouldn't this be like the Joint Chiefs saying we've only got one fighter jet defending Washington? Kirk is out of practice. You haven't logged a single star hour in 2 years, declares Commander Decker, the man who would have been in charge of the Enterprise if Kirk hadn't retired himself. Decker is played by unretired himself. Decker is played by Stephen Collins, who retroactively creepy blandness. There's a ghost of a good idea here, the whole DNA of Wrath of Khan. What if Kirk is too old for this? But part of the strangeness of the motion picture is that the special effects sequences are vivid, mad with pulsating power, and the scenes with human beings are void and stilted and static. Wise shoots with wide angles and deep focus so you can appreciate how full this Enterprise is of humans standing immobile and unresponsive. Wise had a huge budget, and so he built huge sets, each less compelling than the last. The Enterprise's rec room looks as playful as a prison cell, and the observation lounge allows crew members to sit on asylum sofas and contemplate the eternal void. You could say that the whole problem with Star Trek, or a problem that many brilliant creators and actors have grappled with, is how stilted the core ethos of the franchise is, on narrative and visual levels. Star Trek must have a cast of characters who obey authority and work together. Everyone's an officer in some codified organization, military or other. Everyone wears a uniform. Because of most of the action happens with the main characters on the bridge, most of the climactic sequences in Star Trek history happen with all of our heroes sitting down. Wise does not try to bring life to this structure. He doesn't send the crew into fistfights. He doesn't blow up the ship. He doesn't ram spaceships into each other. He does send a couple of characters out into space, but they don't fire lasers at anyone. Late in the long first act, Dr. McCoy arrives on the Enterprise and Kirk asks him for help. Look at how Shatner insistently extends his hand. That is the closest Kirk comes to an action scene in the motion picture. Maybe the problem was Roddenberry. The creator of Star Trek spent the decade after Star Trek trying to bring back Star Trek. He would not let it die. You think of George Miller returning to create the perfect Mad Max 30 years later. Or maybe you think of George Lucas, who returned to the saga he created with no clear sense of what made the saga work so well. Or maybe you think of other people. Chris Carter, Roger Cumble, anyone on Fuller House who isn't John Stamos, returning to the most popular item on a long dormant IMDb page. Roddenberry was devoted to Star Trek, but he carried the blame for all the perceived faults of the motion picture. This is the only Star Trek film Roddenberry really worked on. History repeats. Years later, Roddenberry was booted from The Next Generation. Mythology holds that Roddenberry's utopian vision was the antithesis of drama. So in the motion picture, Decker is only ever mildly upset with Kirk, and Kirk is only ever mildly concerned about Spock. The film can't even commit to a lack of emotion. One of Ilea's first terrible lines is, "My oath of celibacy is on record, Captain." Soon celibate Ilea is transformed into an emotionless robot. Two different layers of Spock-like indifference. But Ilea can't keep her eyes off love interest Decker, and Decker can't stop smiling at her. Here again, another ghost of a good idea. What if Kirk Jr. had to romance Lady Spock for the good of the cosmos? But the outcome is never in doubt. The drama, never dangerous. Roddenberry was a utopianist. He believed in the best ideas about humanity getting along. This is the beautiful thing about Star Trek, and it is why people who love Star Trek get nervous whenever some new Star Trek thing tries to be dark or less than hopeful. It strikes me that the vision of Starfleet in the motion picture is as close to Roddenberry ever got to a pure utopia. Everyone is so serene. Everyone is so peaceful. Everyone is so bland. George Takei, Nichelle Nichols, and Walter Koenig are only in the movie to smile at Kirk. Kubrick's big joke in 2001 was that the computer was more human than the humans. That's another accidental joke in the motion picture. Shatner, dangerously toned down, seems more Vulcan than the Vulcan. The Enterprise crew listens patiently to Kirk giving commands, follows orders. Spock pursues great knowledge with no ambition or thirst. He seeks comic transcendence. He seeks cosmic transcendence with all the exhausted energy of a TSA staffer opening her 31st carry-on of the day, knowing there's probably nothing inside but a toenail clipper and a half-empty water bottle. The motion picture has a simple problem. It's too goddamn slow. Every other Star Trek film is in some way a reaction against that complaint. But the slowness creates the great parts of the motion picture, those long moments of sound and image, unencumbered by plot or character or even dialogue. You could argue that the motion picture is 2001 for dummies, or the misbegotten mashup of 2001 and Star Wars with placeholders where characters should be. But the motion picture is reaching for something no other Star Trek film has even tried to reach for. It is head-trip science fiction, big question science fiction. No one involved can think of a compelling way to dramatize those questions. Surely there was a way, though. You think of Balance of Terror, one of the greatest of all Star Trek stories. Balance of Terror is a bottle episode about people in one set trying to outthink people on another set. Like a lot of great original series episodes, it might as well have a declarative title, "This is about the Cold War." The characters have no psychology. They exist as mouthpieces for thought notions. Let's shoot first. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. We can't trust anyone. We need to trust someone. The narrative is Socratic, but there's nothing wrong with that. Not every fight needs to be choreographed. Could the motion picture have worked like that as a thoughtful exploration? It still almost does, even if everyone besides DeForest Kelley looks bored. There's no other film like it, besides maybe Final Frontier. More on that in 4 weeks. So the motion picture is a fascinating curio. There are better Treks, but they're smaller too, and maybe less ambitious. This could be the last Star Trek ever. Will anyone ever try and write the last Star Trek? Further sign of the cognitive dissonance that powers the motion picture, the special effects are colorful, neon dark against the infinite, and the clothes are beige, gray, light brown, and off-white. The clothes look like the furniture looks like the clothes. These are the shortest-lived of the Trek uniforms, and the extras all look like they're wearing pajamas. I'm not sure we'll ever be in a moment like this again. One of the most expensive movies of the year takes for granted that you want to see middle-aged men wearing V-necks. But devil's advocate, the motion picture uniforms are the only Star Trek costumes that look made for comfort. They're loose, turtlenecks and sweatshirts, onesies, shirts that don't ever get tucked in. Witness the Holy Trinity in slanket chic. The grand exception is Ilea, played by Persis Khambatta, an Indian model with silent cinema eyes. Khambatta was cast as Ilea when the motion picture was going to be a new TV show, and her character only just barely transitioned to the feature film with the barest wisp of a backstory and a kinda nude scene. Captured and reprogrammed by V'ger, Ilea returns to the Enterprise in a barely there bathrobe with a cowl and high heels, a clear sign that V'ger is much kinkier than the movie allows. Worth noting for future reference, the first lens flare in any Star Trek film occurs about 35 minutes into the original theatrical cut. You can see it floating next to Sulu's head. This was almost certainly a mistake brought on by Wise's abject love for unnecessary camera trickery, but penicillin was a mistake too. And here, according to EW, is the entire movie in one shot. I like that article. It's certainly not a slavish love letter to Star Trek the Motion Picture, and a lot of the points that it has to make are quite, I have to say, yes, I do not disagree with them. But to me, the thing about Star Trek and Star Trek the Motion Picture is that it is a story about humanity going out into the cosmos, the unknown cosmos. And the thing is, space is big, really big. And the reason I, of course, called this episode that Star Trek the Motion Picture is the answer to life, the universe, and everything, it's because it's 42 today. Star Trek the Motion Picture is 42, and we know that that is the answer to life, the universe, and everything. What is the question? Well, that's what Star Trek has always been about, isn't it? To find that question, which we might never know. But great Star Trek is always asking us, what does it mean to be human in the cosmos? And I think Star Trek the Motion Picture might be the purest example of that question asked and answered in any Star Trek movie. I will dearly love Star Trek the Motion Picture for the rest of my days because it took what was a television show and it put it up there on the big screen. I couldn't have even dreamt of what a big screen televised or a big screen version of Star Trek the Motion Picture was going to be like until I saw it. And it took a TV series, a colorful, fast-moving, frequently goofy, yet completely enchanting television show, and it infused it with an importance that it never had. Some people might say that it was pretentious. I don't think so. The way Star Trek the Motion Picture unfolded was the way that I believed Star Trek was in my head. It's what I loved about Star Trek. It fired my imagination. It took me someplace I hadn't seen before. And yes, there are people that would say, well, Rob, Star Trek the Motion Picture is just another riff on the second season episode, The Changeling. Well, I actually don't see it as such, because what's really interesting is we actually did launch the Voyager probes into space, and they are both in interstellar space. And the idea that our call was answered and somebody came back to answer that call is fascinating. What happened with Tanru and Nomad, that was an accident. And yet Star Trek the Motion Picture was the results of humans' intentional actions. So we got what we were looking for, and I dearly love this movie. There's a maturity to it. There's a humanity to it that many people don't give it credit for. And it also has one of the most significant character changes in all of Star Trek. That this experience with V'ger leads Spock to understand that human emotion does have value. And in the extended version, in the director's edition of this movie, that is what the movie really winds up being about. Because all of those extra added scenes that they had shot that we saw in other versions, whether it was the ABC TV version, those scenes in the movie, once they're restored, add something that I think no other Star Trek movie has come close to dealing with. And that is watching one of our beloved characters actually have a fundamental change to his character. And isn't that what movies do best? Show us characters learning and growing. And that's what Star Trek the Motion Picture has always been about. And that's why I love it. So, happy 42nd birthday, Star Trek the Motion Picture. Do I think it's the best Star Trek movie? I do not. But it is my favorite Star Trek movie for a number of reasons. I first saw the movie when I was 12 years old, and it took something that I loved in my childhood, and it brought it out of my childhood into my budding adolescence, teenage years, and finally adulthood. Star Trek the Motion Picture didn't just send Spock away with a new appreciation of human emotion. It sent me, as a 12-year-old, away with more of an appreciation for being a human being and living in the cosmos that we live in. And it always, always, never ceases to invoke a sense of wonder in me. Like they said on the poster and at the end of the movie, the human adventure is just beginning. God bless Star Trek for continuing that up until 2009. What I would give to see another movie like Star Trek the Motion Picture or a TV show that had the kind of reverence that have the kind of love for mankind that this movie does. Anyway, that's all I can say. There you go. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. I hope you guys. Hey, they're on Paramount Plus. They're going to debut the new version of Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Actually, it's not the new version. It's the director's edition restored, and I think it's a much superior film. And I can't wait to have it. I can't wait to own it in 4K. So, yep. Anyway, there we are. There we are, kids. Letters. Let's see. Evangelos Kanakis. I think it's Kanakis. Sorry if I get that wrong. Evangelos Kanakis. What a cool name. Greetings to you, Rob, and to the entire PGS community. I'm writing to you because I want your opinion on a subject I've been discussing with some friends and also fellow Asterix the Gaul fans. To make a long story short, after decades of the Asterix franchise being under the creative control of his original creators, it moved to two totally new creators. Yes, Goscinny died in 1977, but Uderzo took over both writing and sketching duties. The story's quality remained mostly the same, and we also got some of the best Asterix stories ever. Since 2013, Jean-Yves Ferry and Didier Conrad, I think, are responsible for the future of the Asterix and the rest of the indomitable Gauls. Under their creative control, we have gotten so far 5 volumes. I own and I've read every single Asterisk volume. I've been collecting them since I was a kid, except the latest, which still hasn't been released in Greece, either in English or translated in Greek. The 4 new stories were okay. I enjoyed them, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. Those volumes had their moments, but mostly they felt like they were depicting other characters and not the ones we learned to love all of those years. The new stories aren't bad. Well, some fans think so. For me, they're okay. Somewhat enjoyable with wasted potential, though. Take, for example, the book Asterisk and the Chieftain's Daughter. Huge potential, but they wasted it. Instead of giving us, in a subtle way, the conflict and the burden we've inherited to the younger generations, the story was flat, totally in your face, and felt as if some point it lost what it was trying to say. This is where the conflict within me comes into play. The Asterisk fan part of me still enjoyed the stories and had fun, but is also sad about the quality drop. The realist side of me keeps complaining about how the stories seem to have gone downhill, but he also understands that Ferry and Conrad are not Uderzo and Goscinny. It would be unfair to expect them to reach the same level as Uderzo and Goscinny did. It would be like giving the Lord of the Rings franchise to a new author and expect him to deliver the same quality as Tolkien. This is impossible. Now, the latest animated movie, Asterix and the Secret of the Magic Potion, was written by Alexandre Astier. Unlike the new books, the movie script that Astier wrote mostly nailed the feeling. The characters are exactly the one we loved from the stories. Even the new character, the little girl, Pectin, was great and felt as she indeed comes from the same world our Gauls live in. Some parts of the story had issues, especially the ending, but the movie succeeded where the new books fail. To be fair, though, the book Asterisk and the Missing Scroll is my favorite out of the new ones so far. It also paid tribute to the original authors in a clever way. I'm going to read the books again and see if the second reading changes my mind. I think that we should let Conrad and Ferry define their own style and eventually give us interesting stories that reach their potential. They have taken on an almost impossible task, but I believe that they might be able to pull it through. Others believe that they should let the Asterisk franchise die instead of trying to preserve it with mediocre attempts. Rob, what do you believe? Should we give more chances to new creators to expand our franchises, our favorite franchises, risking a quality drop until they nail it? Or let the franchises die and be part of art history? Thank you for reading this letter, and please excuse my English. I didn't get to practice it that often. Evangelios. Well, I have to say, Evangelios, I am not up. I mean, I know a little bit about Asterisk and Obelisk, Asterisk, but I'm unfamiliar. I've never read the comics, but I understand your point. I think the point of your letter is that if you have a long-running franchise and that you've loved and other new creators take over, well, what do? As you all well know, I could go off on a tirade now, but I won't. I think what it really comes down to is you have to find the right creators who take over that franchise. I think one of the things that we have to understand that in this world, money is a big issue, and IP, recognizable IP, is always going to be bet on more than something new and unique, because there's a lot of money riding on new franchises, so it's always easier and less risk-averse to go to something that people already know. The problem is that, look, everybody wants a job, and sometimes you wind up with, as in the case of Star Trek, people I think that are wholly unqualified to be writing Star Trek. And yet, because of their connections or because of the fact that they've made lots of other franchise programming, I mean, after what they did to Thomas Harris's Silence of the Lambs, I mean, it's really interesting. You know, with Star Trek, you have people that are running Star Trek that failed to do a Hannibal Lecter series, a Thomas Harris series, that Brian Fuller, who was deposed from Star Trek Discovery, did. And if you look back at Brian Fuller's work on Star Trek Voyager, a lot of which, by the way, in retrospect, is looking better and better as the years go by, his work on both Voyager and on Hannibal speak for themselves. And yet, the people that took over from him basically destroyed his work, which I think is fascinating. It's a fascinating examination of how Brian Fuller, as a creator, showed you the way of how to do something correctly, and then the new people. I think that's the most damning aspects of Secret Hideout's involvement with Star Trek, is to look at what they did both to Star Trek Discovery itself and to Clarice, and then go back and look at the work of Brian Fuller as a creator on both the Star Trek franchise and the Thomas Harris franchise. I mean, there's nothing more damning than that. And it really shows you what the difference is between a showrunner like Brian Fuller and a showrunner like Alex Kurtzman and Michelle Paradise. So I would say the same's true of Asterisk. You know, you got to have people that know what they're doing. And if not, that's always a bad thing. Omar94 writes in and says, "Hi, Rob, moderators, and the Post-Geek singularity. With the way movies have been turning out over the years, the reason for that comes from studio executives. Usually it comes down to the fact that they're either clueless or unaware of the movies they're making. George Lucas has often talked about that, saying how they don't care about the movies. They don't watch movies and they don't know anything about it. He added how they change the movie's stories as they do focus groups to determine who will see movies based on the polling results. He also pointed out the problem is how studios used to be owned by people who cared about movies, but now they're just corporations. David Goyer was once talking about Man of Steel since he wrote the script, and brought up a moment when he noticed the incompetence of studio executives. He was in a meeting with the Warner Brothers executives about the script, and one executive told him to change the ending. Goyer asked, why? To which the executive said, if the ship Superman arrived on Earth with is used to get rid of another ship and the Kryptonians, how would Superman get home to Krypton? He then said there was a long, awkward silence afterwards, to which he told the executive how Krypton was seen being destroyed at the beginning of the movie. It seems like that where evidence shows how executives are a reason for how movies have been turning out over the years. Thanks, and live long and prosper." Well, it's true. It is true, Omar. I mean, you'd be surprised at the kind of stuff that you used to hear. I mean, when I worked at Warner Brothers, admittedly, I was lucky. I worked in the executive suites. I worked for the senior vice president of physical production, and I was in and out of all of the most important people at Warner Brothers offices, including Bob Daly and Terry Semmel, who ran the studio when I was there. And I heard a lot of crazy stuff. And it's very interesting because, look, no one's going to turn down an opportunity to work in Hollywood, especially if you have an Ivy League educated business degree on your resume. You know, if you went to Harvard or Yale or Princeton or Stanford or whatever, you look pretty good on a spreadsheet in terms of corporations hiring you. The problem with that is, does that make you qualified to be a storyteller or to even tell other storytellers how they should tell their stories? Well, usually no, but the executives are put in a position where they are exactly supposed to do that very thing. And it gets a little weird. It gets a little weird because you have people that are thinking about telling their stories all day, every day, 365 days a year that are now beholden to people that don't know anything about telling stories. Or, well, there are some great executives. That's not to say that there aren't. There are. There are great executives, but they're few and far between. But the problem is most executives don't want to take a risk or a chance because one wrong move, if they back the wrong horse, well, they lose a job. So it's crazy. But yeah, not always. You'd think with the amount of money involved that the kind of people that would be involved in making movies would really, really, really know their shit. But that's not the way it works. Unfortunately. This one comes from our own Tom Jr. Jackson, Goof Emeritus. Good day, Rob. There is no topic to this letter, so I'm going to freestyle. As I've said in some of my letters to you, I'm always amazed at the amount of support that the PGS has for each other. Case in point, during the members-only Zoom call, by the way, where's my members-only jacket? Do they still make those? Just a brown girl came on and discussed an issue with bootlegging movies. Now, as both of you were talking, the amount of support that came through for her with how a lot of people rallied behind her made me so proud to be a member of the PGS. The community that we have here is amazing and wonderful. I agree. Even though I've been a member now for only a year and some change, I always love the support I see members bringing to one another. As you have said, you don't really know us other than the little electronic thingy that we use to communicate on or from our letters. We've come to know you either from your films and channel rants or just watching you sleep. That being said, the topics that we either bring up or you bring up give us some wide variety of things to talk about. Some things get a little political, but we try and keep it civil. Other than that, I rather enjoy what we all have to say to one another. What's the point of this letter? The point is, we are a welcoming, close-knit community that are very comfortable with telling you the most personal things that are going on with us. Like me with my kidney transplants, or Mikey Lito talking about his Aunt Polly in her documentary. By the way, did you know that there's a college named after her? It is a residential college for undergrads over at Yale College. Hashtag the more you know. The amount of friends that I have made here in the Post-Geek Singularity is awesome, and it makes me proud to be not only a member of this community, but a friend as well. I'm also proud to call you a good friend, and even though we've never met in person, I still think of you as a good friend. My mother has noticed how ever since I've joined the PGS that I'm not as quiet and closed off from people and that I talk a bit more. Yes, I will admit sometimes I find alone time to be okay, but through all of you, I found a community to talk to people about the topics that not only interest me, but also topics that I probably wouldn't talk to anyone else about. From becoming good friends with people like yourself, Elizabeth, Dieter, who, by the way, has a great YouTube channel called Positive Fandom, and all should go subscribe to it, and be sure to let her know I sent you. Scotty from the Phantasmagorium, Catherine, Terrier, Todd Michael, Connie Sang, Zephyr Chan, and Jerry Mathers as the Beaver. I had to throw that one in. I have found truly the best friends I could ever have. So as I close this letter, I want to say thank you. Thank you to all, and of course to you, Rob. Thank you for welcoming me and showing me that good and goof people are out there. Oh, and one more thing, for those of you who don't understand the meaning of we are all goof people, this is what it means. We all goof up in life one way or another. No one is perfect, not even me. We're all goof people because of this. Now you know, and hopefully understand that it is a positive thing. Thank you for giving me the time to wax upon this subject and sharing my thoughts with you all. Until next time, Tom motherfucking Jr. Jackson, Emeritus de Goof. I don't know what to say other than that. That's a great letter, Tom. It's like what Khan said. I of course, I cannot help but be touched. And what a great letter. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. I think that's one of the greatest things. It's a byproduct of this channel that I was not expecting. By the way, on that note, I would like to say that George Perez, one of my favorite comic artists who drew things like DC's Crisis on Infinite Earths, drew the Avengers, drew the Justice League, drew Wonder Woman. I loved his run. He wrote Wonder Woman as well. George Perez, one of my favorite comic book writers, announced that he had stage 3 pancreatic cancer today on his Facebook page and doesn't expect to last longer than 6 months or a year. I just wanted to say that my heart goes out to him to all of his family members, and all the people that work with him over the last decades. He's brought me enjoyment literally almost my entire life. He's one of my favorite comic artists, and while he'll leave behind, and he's not gone yet, but he just announced it today, and while he leaves a rich legacy behind, my thoughts are with his family and his friends and with George himself. And all I can do is say, George, you've given me love, you've given me work and love and craftsmanship and artistry for literally my whole life. And I wish you all the best, sir, and I hope you are comfortable and you're surrounded by your family and friends and you get to do whatever you want to do for the coming year. So, this next one comes from Jonathan Hurst. Hi, Rob. I just finished your latest stream where you commented on the theater-going experience, and I had to send you a quick message. I recently visited my local AMC theater on opening day for the latest James Bond film. I'd never been to this location, and they advertised what they call their Big D experience. That's what she said. While I knew going in it wasn't IMAX, I was still excited to see the film on a larger-than-normal screen. And let me tell you, it was awful. The issues I had were entirely in the picture quality. The image projected was so light I could barely tell what was happening in the darker scenes. Side note, they didn't even turn the lights off during the opening movie trailers, meaning those were completely impossible to see. I guess I should have known when for the first showing on opening day it was only myself and 4 other individuals in the theaters, that seats close to 100 in attendance. I contacted the theater afterwards with my feedback, and all I got back was an email saying they checked the projector and it's working as normal. No invitation to come back. I'm sure you can guess I have no plans to ever return to that location. Anyway, there are many things I'd love to talk to you about today. For example, my mutual frustration over current Trek, but I'll try and keep this letter on topic. Many thanks for everything you do. I know you'll eventually have your hands full with making other movies, but in the meantime, I'm enjoying all the time you spend with us on YouTube. All the best, Jonathan Hurst. Jonathan, first of all, thanks for the kind words, but you know what? It makes my teeth ache when I hear stories like this. Movie theaters have one job: to project movies with great picture and great sound. And I guess secondarily to supply you with fresh popcorn and great refreshments and snacks and all that. But there's no excuse. There's, especially opening a new movie, that's why you got to do a check. You know, when I was growing up, they would run the movie the night before. They would do a sound check, and the theaters that I would go to, and if you knew the projectionist or you knew the manager, you could stay and watch the movies as they did their sound and picture checks, and I frequently did that. And when I hear about bad projection, I'm like, there's nothing worse. Nothing worse. Really bothers me. So I'm sorry you had that experience, and the fact that they didn't even ask you to come back. Wow. This next letter. Danny Delmazzo wrote this one. Hi, Rob. I'm a fan of your show, and I just recently joined the Post-Geek Singularity community. Well, Danny, welcome, sir. It would be great to pick your brain on a topic that I find interesting and that you've recently been vocal about, the future of the entertainment industry. Namely, how you indicated that video games might be the art form of the 21st century. I should preface this by saying that I'm not a gamer and haven't played much since I was a teenager, which would put me at around N64 territory since I'm 35 now. I played PlayStation 3 on occasion, but only with friends that were really into it. I am, however, a film and book geek, and like you, distressed about the state of cinema as an art form. My question is, do you believe that video games will eventually carry the same value as movies and TV, if it doesn't already, as a piece of narrative storytelling? And I don't mean to denigrate this. I don't mean to denigrate video games as an art form. It's every bit as valid in its own right, and they have undoubtedly become a new vehicle for storytelling. However, I've always found it difficult to overlook the participatory aspect of a video game when comparing it to watching a film or reading a book. It may not be an apt comparison, but if I'm riding a 4D attraction at Disney World or having a VR experience at The Void, I wouldn't necessarily consider that an edifying experience in the same way as, say, watching a great Kubrick film or immersing myself in a fantastic novel. Of course, it could be edifying in a different way, as art through experience, but I feel immersed in narrative to the point where I'm playing a vital role in it and feeling like I'm in danger along with the characters. Wouldn't that be too much of a distraction to really absorb the nuances of the story? Reading a great novel or watching a great film is also an immersive experience, but you have the benefit of a God's eye perspective, and you personally don't have anything at stake. like getting to the next level or scoring points in a game. You're just an empathetic observer. I guess you could say that VR is the next level of gaming, but I've always had a theory that it has the potential to be unique from it or form of it. If it could be eventually steered towards something a little more like reading or sitting down to watch a play or a film. If you could be a removed observer who is simply immersed in the world but not participating in the narrative, then I believe it has the potential to offer what films and television currently do. It would just have that extra dimension of being a more tactile experience. If so, then perhaps the future auteurs will no longer be film directors or TV producers, but production designers, since so much of the artistry and storytelling will rely on environments that are being created. But until then, I have reservations about video games completely replacing movies as the future of narrative storytelling. Again, I don't mean to compare the two unfairly or suggest that one is better. I'm simply saying that the narrative value of reading or watching movies or going to a play is quite different than the narrative value you'd get from playing a video game. And if so, then one can't replace the other. Traditional narrative storytelling will always be around, but as technology continues to allow for gaming and VR to take center stage, do you think that it will no longer be as important to the mainstream or even to culture, especially as a more first-person experience type of art begins to flourish? Are the holodecks finally coming? Laugh out loud. Thank you for taking the time. Well, Danny, first of all, thanks for being part of the PGS. That's a great letter you've written. That's a lot to unpack, but I would say this, and what I was saying about, I think that filmed narratives were the art form of the 20th century. I think gaming and technologies, interactive, immersive technologies, some that we haven't even seen yet because they haven't been invented, are going to be the art form of the 21st century. And as I pointed out, I don't know what that is. I would expect, I was just saying that I will expect some kind of a technological revolution. I mean, I know we're seeing it every day. There's technological revolutions going on. But I mean, in terms of immersive, we're seeing it now. I mean, we're stepping into augmented reality, which is we've had it for a while. But I think by the time we get to the end of this decade, the 2020s, it'll be the same thing that happened in movies. Same way when the advent of sound and that irrevocably changed cinema forever. Now, I don't know what this revolution is going to be. I just see that I know for a fact that, look, there's always going to be narrative. There's going to be always books and plays and movies. I don't think they're going to go away anytime soon. But in terms of like in younger people, I think we have a whole generation of people growing up where they are the focus, that they're the center of everything. They've curated their own online experiences, everything, as opposed to, in my life, I've always, and I think, people my age and maybe a little younger and older, we've sort of always reached out. Our narratives were all about expanding our minds, but nowadays we have narratives where we can be the center of attention, whether it's social media, whether you're curating your YouTube experience when you're watching shows that, like this show, if it's something you're interested in, or like I really enjoy, I watch so many different things on YouTube. I like zipping around but it's interesting because it's all stuff that I'm bringing into me as opposed to reaching out. And I think what's going to happen is people's entertainment experiences are going to be focused. I don't think it's a bad thing. I just think that if you can be, everyone wants to believe they're the star of their own reality show anyway, and I think that in you look at people online, we're definitely becoming, especially younger people, and this is no offense, but a lot of navel-gazing, myopic, or narcissistic people, and we're going through a transitional state, and I think that whatever this new technology is going to be, we are going to be the protagonists. Now, people are still going to have to, I don't think it's just going to be production design. People are still going to have to write the experiences, write the characters. But when you're the center of the thing that you're playing, yeah, you'll still be part of a narrative and you'll be able to control it to a certain extent. But I just think that playing immersive technologies is going to be more interesting to people than simple narratives. I mean, when we grew up, we didn't have those. First video game I ever owned was a Coleco Telstar, which had Pong, hockey, and handball. And it came with a cool like this oval, curvy console and most primitive thing in the world. But now to see where video games have come, especially sandbox games, where whether you're playing whether it's Grand Theft Auto or Ghost of Tsushima or Red Dead Redemption 2. I mean, sandbox games literally, and I think we're going to see massive extensions of those. And that's what we're going to wind up. You're going to be immersed. People are going to be immersed in whole worlds. I mean, imagine if you could, like a holodeck, be completely immersed. You're not just watching a screen, but you're literally in a position. And I think VR technology is only going to get better and better. That's what Facebook wants. They want a metaverse where you're going to interact. Ready Player One, Snow Crash, whatever. It's going to be interesting to see where it goes. I'm curious. So, it'll be curious to see. I'll be curious to see where all of that does wind up. Where does it all go? I don't know. Let's see. I got more letters. No, I thought I had more letters than I know I did. Hang on. I know I have more letters because I saw them, because I know that I've got an Emil Johansson letter. I just have to find out where it is. Here we go. This letter comes from our own Emil Johansson, and coincidentally, it's about the same topic. Emil says, I saw your comments about how video games could be the future of entertainment, perhaps becoming even more respected than the film industry. I hear two things often from different people when they talk about games. The first thing is that Grand Theft Auto is basically the greatest thing ever, and the second thing is that future is VR, and I disagree with both. When I grew up, I wanted to work with movies as a director. That obviously never happened, and if it did happen, I would have already done that by now. I don't know. I probably wouldn't have done some fancy Marvel movies, even though that's mostly what I watch now. I played a lot of video games when I grew up and would imagine how they would work as movies. Now it's sort of the opposite. I want to work with games, but I watch more movies, probably. Anyway, I don't believe that Grand Theft Auto is a masterpiece in creativity or thought-provoking or helpful somehow. I think people like it because it's fun to be a bad person in a fantasy. I understand how concerned parents and other adults are about violence in video games. I don't think it should be banned. Violence is sort of the core of most gameplay, but I get it. VR is fancy technology, but doesn't automatically give an amazing experience. I bet after people try it a lot, it would become as normal and boring as anything else. What I see as potential in games is to make stories just like any other medium. If creators share some common vision to execute a unique experience that captures people, then that's the future of video games. It's not fancy tech or the excuse to do violence, it's just fun or fascinating like anything else. I think that's hard to achieve, though. It's not just a by-the-numbers thing or God-given by technology. It's something that takes skill and can't really be taught. But that's what I like about the industry. People in magazines that I read when I grew up would complain about games based on movies, comparing them to Grand Theft Auto and saying that those games were trash. However, now games based on movies such as the Arkham games or Insomniac's Spider-Man games are top tier. People didn't just follow the trend, they took something and did something original with it, and it worked better than people could anticipate, because those games have, in my opinion, good storytelling. Anyway, thanks for reading this. Emil, the second best Swede. Are you saying behind Stubble McShave, do we now have a hierarchy of Swedes on this channel? No, I see you all. You're all great Swedes. There's no hierarchy of Swedes on this channel. The hierarchy of needs? Well, we've got the hierarchy of Swedes. No, not really. But Emil, I think it's a good question. Look, I don't necessarily think that Grand Theft Auto, it's to me, it's just the diversity of the sandbox that you're in and the fact that, yeah, okay, it's always fun to play a bad person, but there's just a lot of really interesting gameplay that's happening in those shows or in that game. It's a lot of fun, but what I'm saying is that eventually we're going to get to a holodeck-like situation where we are going to be, it's going to be completely immersive, and how that's going to work, I don't yet know. I think as the technology gets better and better, it's going to be more. I mean, imagine if your technology was completely immersive to the point where it felt as if you're really in a fantasy world. Like, that's why it's appealing to go to Westworld. If we eventually get to that point, it'll all be virtual. But I think that's what people are really going to be interested in, because they're going to get. I mean, right now, when you play a video game, it's a distancing thing. You're playing a game. You're looking at a screen. But what happens when you're not? That's what virtual reality. You look at that Darth Vader virtual reality game. It's pretty good. But that stuff's only going to get better. Imagine what the technology is going to be in 10 years. Now, I can't imagine. I mean, it's going to be more like Ready Player One, where you're always going to have to probably wear something, because if you're going to be in a holodeck kind of environment, if they ever get to that kind of technology, if they take like what they've got for stagecraft now, which they use like volume stages where they shoot the Mandalorian and stuff, you have to go to a place like that. I don't know if that's really, we're going to have that in the home. But if you had it in the home, imagine what that would be like. I mean, it'd be pretty great if you could like go into World War II. You, instead of playing Call of Duty and storm the beach at Normandy on your screen, you're there, man. You're running onto the beach. You got boots on the ground at on Omaha Beach. I mean, it's, if you could get to that level, and I think that's where gaming will probably wind up going. We'll see. But yeah, I mean, all games still need a good story. You still need an interesting scenario. But what if games were more like life? Like you're a grunt, whether you're playing Halo or whether you're playing Call of Duty or wherever, you are. And what would be interesting is you won't even know if you're playing with NPCs or you're playing with other real people. I mean, imagine like we're already playing. Pick your game. Whether you're playing League of Legends, whatever melee game you want to play, Dota, Fortnite, whatever. I mean, imagine if it, instead of, there's no distance anymore between you and the screen, that you're actually running around. You're actually running around, and I think it could be really interesting. I think kind of that's where things are going, but I don't know. Let's see. This is a tough one. Shiketti. This one's from Shiketti. Is it Shiketti Wallace? Dear Robert, I've heard your views on Star Trek for many weeks now, and I must say you are the man who has set the standards we all must have when it comes to stating the drastic measures which must be taken to fix all the problems the fans have with these shows. Just as many have feared, seeing the different movies and series through the years, slick special effects and flash close combat moves have replaced a well-thought-out story arc that's getting the structured continuity of the script right. There's not enough charm, charisma, good acting, with a high level of bravado that can save a bad script with the wrong vision behind it. Many actors have tried and failed to do this in many different genres. Why must the so-called creative experts behind Star Trek take a route that strays away from the standard ideology left behind by the master Gene Roddenberry that we should all follow? To create great works that can follow the original masterpiece, you must first learn to study the content that has already been made so that you can begin to get a really solid idea about the direction you can head in. Totally agree. Nobody said that the fans just want a rehash of the Star Trek of old. Very good point. I don't think anyone wants a rehash. I certainly don't want a rehash of Star Trek. What I do want is good Star Trek. Bring on the new. It has nothing to do with something that isn't new. It has to do with, look, I do not believe that the characters on Star Trek Discovery would ever make it as far as they've made it on the show, because it doesn't seem like there's any sense that Starfleet is a quasi-military organization or that there's any discipline or chain of command. In every episode, Michael Burnham goes off book. She winds up getting in the middle of everything, and it's completely unbelievable. Whenever I watch that show, I don't believe anybody acts like they would act in these situations. And nor do I think that anybody who's writing the show has a particular grasp of how these organizations work in the first place. That's what I can't stand about Star Trek Discovery. I don't believe it. I'm always banging on about verisimilitude. And what is verisimilitude? Verisimilitude is the feeling that you're watching something that has a reality in it, that you believe the reality within. Hey, and when I mean that, I mean the reality within the Star Trek universe reality. And when you tell me that some being has a connection to dilithium genetically because they grew up on a dilithium-rich planet, and somehow they can throw a temper tantrum and destroy all the dilithium in the universe, that's strange credulity. I don't believe that. That's some bullshit gobbledygook that somebody has very little grasp of science or understanding came up with as some plot point. And I'm watching this going, I don't buy that. Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard are a succession of decisions that are being made by the producers and writers that throw me into a state of disbelief. And that's what I hate. That's the only thing I really hate about Star Trek. It has nothing to do with the color of somebody's skin. It has nothing to do with the kind of representation, although I think the kind of representation they're doing on modern Star Trek is ham-fisted and awful. I think they segregate their characters. They other and segregate their characters in a way that I've never seen on any other TV show. It's bizarre, and I don't understand why they do it. Anyway, to create great works that can follow the original masterpiece, you must first learn to study the content that has already been made so that you can begin to get a really solid idea of the direction you can head in. Nobody said fans just want a rehash of the Star Trek of old. We want something we can watch, feeling that a true imagination connoisseur has been at the wheel of the ideas train, going at full speed, ready to pull out all the stops along the way as they produce a visual adventure that will be a delight for all to watch on repeat. There are ways to take your mind to a place where you can have that golden moment where the imagination leads you down a path where your consciousness can realize that there's a potential for your ideas to be a thing that can come into the light. But on your way, there you must be able to understand the core intelligence behind the series creator's vision. Are you becoming a part of a team of people who do not want to fail in their task to achieve a great feat by adding a series to the Star Trek world that leaves people in awe with its brilliance? Well, you must first learn to hone those instincts as a writer. Study the near-flawless structure of the sci-fi shows that came before, which were a success in the eyes of many. Become an ardent critic of the shows that have failed and a blatant fan of that which was a hit as you make your own things to do when it comes to making a masterpiece. As I write this letter, I know there are many who think it easier said than done who are in the world of creating visual works, but everyone who reads these words knows that the creation game was never easy, and whoever thinks it is has fooled themselves greatly. I would rather see a Star Trek series which had a team master behind it that knows with every tick and talk there's a group of fans waiting to see a great display of character and story development with a scientific flow behind it that we can understand and agree upon. Whenever this happens, I'll be there rooting for the guys upstairs to make more projects we see and enjoy. That's from TSK Wallace. Fun point of fact. So there you go. You're absolutely correct. Yes, I believe you. I believe exactly that. And that's all we want. But, when you have a series creator like Alex Kurtzman saying that they want to use Star Trek as a platform, I'm like, first of all, who are you guys to be lecturing anyone? I mean, tell stories. There's the great stories have universal truths that we should all find self-evident. Young, old, straight, gay, black, white. I mean, a great story should appeal to everyone. You don't need to be telling specific stories that are expected to convey a message because that presupposes that you know what message people should be getting. A story should tell the message. A story should give you that. It should be inherent in the story that you're going to tell. And I don't know what to tell them, but there you go. Well, let's see what you guys are saying. Those are a good bunch of letters, folks. Once again, let's hear it for your letter writing. Let's see. Where are we at here? Why, Helen? Why do you do these things? I can never stop saying that. Brian Cruz says, I just read Moby Dick and I loved it, but I realized that when Picard quotes the book in First Contact, he gets the quote wrong. Any idea why the script changed it? I don't know. Maybe it was a paraphrase that they didn't want to do the exact thing. I've certainly been known to do that in my own scripts. That's all I can remember. That's what I have to say is that they paraphrased it. Yeah. Willow says, if Star Trek the Motion Picture is the answer, what is the ultimate question to life, the universe, and everything? I don't know. That's why the Earth was made. To come up with a question, but then it was destroyed to make way for an interstellar bypass. So we'll never get the answer, Willow. That's why you have to read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Human Kirk became a member. Martino Simoni. Oh, Martino. Once again, Martino is sending in the super chats supporting this channel. Martino says, keep educating us carbon-based life forms. Martino, I will endeavor to do that. By the way, have you seen the ad for the Playmobil DB5? I'm getting that sucker, buddy. That ad's pretty good. I can't wait. Chloe Fanning says, Let's see. Kira Allen is only the second actor in 70 years that is wheelchair bound in a real life that's been cast in a main role in the upcoming Netflix show's run. The show will be on Netflix Canada on April 2nd. That's interesting. Kira Allen, that is wheelchair bound in real life. Wow, that's interesting. What about like in Wise Guy? Was Jim Burns, was he in a wheelchair in real life? That's an interesting question. I love hearing that. I think that's great. Human Kirk says, one thing I think people in our sphere can do more of is not just bitch about STD, but celebrate the best Star Trek, such as this stream. Well, thank you, Human Kirk. I mean, I think we can do both. But no, I agree with you. Bitching about modern Star Trek, it's like how much can you bitch about modern Star Trek? I mean, I think, after watching the third episode of Discovery, I'm like, what? I mean, there's so much that I want to bitch about that but it's pointless at this. I mean, I'll watch Picard just because I want to see how cliche and awful Picard probably is going to be. But I'm willing to concede that maybe there's something interesting in it. Maybe my problem though is all of their writing staff has shown. And this idea that they're going back and everything. I mean, Strange New Worlds. Let's go do yet another sequel series. I mean, they're doing a sequel series to Discovery, which was already a prequel series. So now they're doing a series that's both a sequel and a prequel. And I'm just like, why don't you create something new? Do something. I mean, at least Lower Decks and Prodigy are attempts to do something new. Anyway. Emma Bannon, the lovely Emma Bannon, says, hey, Rob, sorry you've had problems with your screen. Didn't realize you were such a winker. But Star Trek the Motion Picture is good for so many reasons. No mustache-twirling villain, a mystery to be solved, and it takes its time to tell its story, something which I love. Well, that's why you and I are friends. You and I clearly park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. Hash Shandycoot and Super Chagokin Z became a member. Well, thanks, guys. Appreciate that. A Super Blubberpuss sends in a super chat and said, I was 15 when Star Trek the Motion Picture came out. I still love it because it's great. And it just gets better with that director's edition. Chief Cook sends in a super chat and says, hi, Rob. If Gene made TNG like the TMP without the crazy uniforms and Data and Troy, do you think the series would have twice better current TNG look now? I don't quite know. Look, to be honest, TNG is a very weird, you go back and you look at the show, especially the first two seasons, it's bizarre. It certainly doesn't look like the time in which it was made. In a way, it feels almost like a throwback to some era that maybe never was. I mean, it took a while. Gene Roddenberry was trying to recreate, he's trying to capture lightning in a bottle twice. It was tough. I mean, it really didn't gel until Michael Piller came on board in the third year, in the third season, and switched it and made sure all the stories were generated out of the characters as opposed to out there, which I think was a very smart move to make because television had changed in the intervening 20 years. So, I don't know. I think Next Generation, I mean, if you think about that show, 7 years, 2 or 4 feature films, and it spawned 3 other shows, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise. I think it did well the way it was. Lieutenant Commander Salinga says, admittedly, Geordi LaForge was a character that had trouble connecting with women and was awkward around them, as it sometimes happens with technical nerds like engineers that feel more comfortable with their gadgets. So I thought, cut to LeVar Burton. The idea that Geordi never got laid is ludicrous. It's preposterous and it's insulting. Those white men who wrote the show had an unconscious bias that was on display to me and to other people of color. And that is from a Rolling Stone interview. What the fuck? Clearly, judging by where they took Michael Dorn in Deep Space Nine, I don't think it's true. I don't think it's true. I think they were leaning into more of the nerdy type, and frankly, I mean, you could even say that maybe Geordi wasn't a straight man. And that his friendship with Data was more of an indication. Of course, I know Leah Brahms and all that stuff, but still, I think that this retconning that way is having done having done a bunch of documentaries and delving into the making of Next Generation for 3 years and really talking to all the writers and the producers and everybody who was involved with making the show, I don't think that's true. I don't think anybody had an unconscious bias about any of that, especially if you flip over and look at what was going on over on Deep Space Nine. I think that they just didn't know what to do with that character. Look, I mean, Geordi was kind of bounced around from the first season. He was part of the bridge crew. Then they moved him down to engineering. Again, I think that they just didn't know what to do with him. So Lucas Bachman says, just curious, did you ever get a chance to see the 80s He-Man cartoon? Netflix He-Man Part 2 never made the top 10 viewing list. Huge interest drop. You know what? The He-Man, well, I've talked about this on the show before. I did buy the first series of He-Man figures, but I was a little too old when it started, so I've never really been a He-Man fan. I've never delved into that franchise because I think I was just a little too old, and I haven't watched, because of that, the Netflix version. I did see, of course, Masters of the Universe, the feature film. But, yeah. Emil Johansson says Star Trek is cooler than Star Wars. Well, I don't know about cooler. I mean, I like it better. But I think they're just different. It's so weird that Star Wars and Star Trek, I mean, I loved Star Wars when it came out. I thought it was great. I never saw it as a rivalry thing. I thought it was a totally different thing. Star Wars was a space fantasy adventure, swashbuckling fantasy adventure, whereas Star Trek was a cerebral, more of a science fiction show that dealt with totally different issues. I mean, if you were to tell Star Trek-like stories within the Star Wars universe, I don't think it would be Star Wars anymore. I think they're both very different storytelling. They have different storytelling attitudes, and I like that about them. I like them both. Marco Lanny sends in a super chat and says, I don't mind the voyage home. I could watch the shit out of Just McCoy in a present-day hospital, critiquing everything and sharing his knowledge. Marco, I'm right there with you. Fundoscopic examination. I mean, it's so... that's why Star Trek is so great, because those characters are so good. I think that's what really is the problem with modern Star Trek, is the characters that they're giving us are generic at best. And, and people love Tilly because they see them. That's me. Tilly's me. She's a proxy for the audience. And Tilly's somebody you want to hang out with. But to me, she doesn't act, or I don't believe her on I don't believe any of the characters in Star Trek Discovery. I like the new admiral, the head of Starfleet. That's about it. And some of the new dignitaries that they're bringing on are okay. But other than that, I'm just, yeah. Nikita Monahan, is it? Oh no, Mahanan? Nikita Mahanan? Did I get that right? Are you going to John's Spider-Man No Way Home screening? Yes, I am. John asked me to go to that Spider-Man No Way Home screening, and I'm going to go. Just so you know, many of us miss you there and ask about you almost daily. I appreciate that, Nikita. Yeah, I mean, I miss doing John's show. But I've talked about before, before the pandemic, we did John's show from his house. Like, I would go to his house every day. And I don't disagree with him. I like the energy of being on that show. It's just, to do an hour and a half show and have it be over a 2-hour round trip for me, it doesn't make it, I have too much to do. I have too many other things that I have to do. And unfortunately, I can't, there's nothing I can do about that. Human Kirk says, ever heard of some cinema greats who survived working behind the Iron Curtain? Big fan of Milos Forman and Andre Wajda. Yes, Man of Iron is incredible. I love Man of Iron. And of course, Milos Forman, I mean, come on. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Amadeus. Yeah, he's one of our great directors. There's a lot of great directors that are from behind the Iron Curtain. I mean, obviously my beloved Andrei Tarkovsky. And then Krzysztof Kieslowski, one of my favorite directors. So, yeah, I'm a big fan. And all these people that renewed their membership to Rock Media. Timbula the Spider Monkey. Where's Timbula been? Mike Conrad, Brian Evans, Jubbs McGee, James Drake, S. Beam, Atticatch Sound, Bob, Stub McShave, The Squish Show, Michael Rodriguez, and Willow Yang. Thanks for all keeping up being members. I appreciate that. Wayne Edwards says, hello, Rob. I'm also a fan of Star Trek The Motion Picture. I saw it as a 9-year-old kid in a movie theater with my brother, and we were blown away. It was the most ahead thinking of all the films, and I love the director's cut. Officially, it's called director's edition. Whenever I say director's cut, they yell at me. They're like, no, it's the director's edition. I'm like, yo, okay. DC All the Way sends in a super chat and then another super chat. Rob, what are your thoughts on Star Trek Continues on YouTube? I thought it was a true follow-up to the original show. Well, DC All the Way, Star Trek Continues is Vic Mignogna and company's extension of the original series. And I think it's an incredible, loving recreation of the original series. And I thought when it when it was really well written, it did a really good job. Like I think Lolani was the first episode. I'm like, this is really good. But it wasn't perfect, but it's pretty good. I enjoy it. Fernando Barrero sends in a tip and says, hi, R&B. Hope you're enjoying this holiday season. What are your overall thoughts on where Marvel is heading to so far in Phase 4? Also, what were your thoughts on Apple's version of The Foundation? Looking forward to the last season of The Expanse. Well, first of all, I love The Expanse. And, this book's this season's going to be, I think it's a truncated season. I hope is it only 6 episodes or something? It's going to be a barn burner of a season. I can't wait. Very excited about that. I liked Foundation for the most part. I thought it was really ambitious. I want to see where they take it, but I really liked it a lot. I mean, it was interesting. It helped my interest, and I'm like, where are they going to go with this? And it was beautifully made. Beautifully made. As for Marvel Phase 4, I think I'm enjoying it more than most people. But I kind of, I understand they're going back and rebuilding from the Infinity Saga, but they're going to have to do a lot. They've really started, I guess we're going to see that where it's all going to go. I mean, I think Spider-Man No Way Home and Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness and Thor Love and Thunder are really going to give us more of a look at where all of this is leading. Because right now there's all this stuff happening, but I don't, and maybe that's just me because we're used to seeing this whole big lead up or build up to Thanos, and we got Infinity War and Endgame, which I think are two of the most entertaining fantasy-based movies I've ever seen. I mean, as a lifelong comic book fan, to watch Infinity War and Endgame was hugely satisfying to me. And even though Endgame was not as tightly focused as Infinity War was by definition, I mean, I loved it. I can't wait to see where it's all going to go, but I'm not, I don't quite know, or maybe we're not supposed to know yet, because they're introducing all these new characters, and I just don't know where we're going to wind up, to be honest. Where are we going to wind up? I don't know. I do not know. Well, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I think it's time to bring this celebratory episode of Robservations to a close. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank my moderators for doing their jobs. I want to thank Brian Hepburn, Justin Toner, Louise X. Sparrow, I love saying her name, who's a big Star Trek fan, which I love, for being here. And thank you. I don't know if Justin or Josh was here, but thank you all. Darren Seeley. So thank you for being moderators. I want to thank everybody for supporting the channel via tips and super chats, and also becoming members. I thought it was a great member call on the Saturday. We're going to do one more of those, not this weekend, but probably the weekend afterwards. So the 10th probably was at the 17th or something. And that'll be the last member call for the year. And remember, if you have, we're about to start season 4 of Robservations, and if you have ideas about how to improve the channel, I'm all ears. I think I might do a live stream at some point, maybe this week, probably an evening live stream that's specifically for you guys to tell me what you'd like to see happen with the channel. And on that note, I would say, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. And with that, I would say to all of you, have a better day. So ends Robservations, episode number 768. Happy birthday, Star Trek The Motion Picture. 42 years old today.